That looks good, Eric.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get started with some of our logistics. Welcome to Virtual Breakfast. My name is Eric Anderson. I'm a field crops educator, specifically focused on soybean throughout the state, and I'll be your host this morning. Let's take care of a couple of things. Collection of demographic information from program participants is an important mandated aspect of all Michigan State University Extension programming. This is voluntary. The information that you provide will not be used in any way to identify you personally, but rather as an anonymous member that participated in this program. There's going to be a poll that comes up on your screen. If you could take a moment to fill that out, that would be great.
Turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. So again, just a couple of logistics for those of you who have not joined us in the past. When you join, please mute yourself during the presentations. We'll have opportunity later for Q&A, so anything that you have to share with us, we're going to try to funnel all of that through the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Particularly if you're going to be requesting RUP credits, we ask that you make sure that your first and last name, the way that they appear on your certification, that those appear in the Zoom window. So if it doesn't, go ahead and click on the participant list icon, change your name, hover over it and click on it, and then you can change your name, type it in again, just the way it shows on your certification card. And you can put questions in the chat or the Q&A at the bottom of your screen anytime throughout the morning. And then we'll have a time after the presentations to follow up with all those questions. So first up this morning is Marty Chilvers. He is our field crop pathologist. He's going to be specifically talking about a couple of diseases, white mold and soybean, corn tar spot. But if you have any questions about other diseases, you feel free to ask those as well. So Marty, thanks for joining, and I'm going to let you take over.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks, Eric, for the introduction. So before I get started, I just want to acknowledge support from the commodity groups and some of the other funding sources that make this work possible. So we're going to talk about white mold, soybean, and tar spot for corn, and we'll touch on ear mold as well. So let's get going. So I'm going to just jump straight in because we've got a fair bit to talk about. So I'll skip some of the introductory material we normally go through. So some of the factors that drive white mold is a history of disease, and I think this is a really critical one to have an understanding of what risk level you have had in fields previous that you're back in with soybean or dry bean right now, because that's a really key determinant of the likelihood of disease. You've got to have those white mold sclerotia that are surviving in the soil that can germinate to produce those apothecia or mushrooms that release the spores. Variety susceptibility is an absolute key piece too, and I'll show you some data about that. And then canopy closure. Open canopies, we're far less likely to get the production of these apothecia as opposed to closed canopies. And then moisture events during flowering to allow that infection process to occur and the mushrooms to form. And we'll talk quickly about spore castor as well, which is a prediction model for these apothecia, not for final disease, but for the presence of those apothecia. We run a lot of white mold trials at the Montcalm Research Centre. It's under irrigation, so we can push water in those dry years to ensure that we can collect disease data every year. So I wanted just to point out the value of variety resistance. And I guess if you're trying to prioritize fields for a fungicide application, I would go back to your seed catalogs and get a sense of how susceptible or resistant your different soybean varieties are. So what I'm showing here in that there's a very strong relationship between the amount of white mold disease that we see in soybean varieties and their final yield. So we see that over years. We can obviously see some shifts depending on the severity of disease from year to year. So, one variety might look really good one year, but if we get a heavy disease year the next, it might not look so good. So be aware of that year-to-year variability. But in 21, what I'm showing here is that we had about a 25 bushel spread from the most resistant soybean variety to the most susceptible. In 22, that range was less, but still about a 16 bushel difference under very severe disease pressure from that most resistant through to the most susceptible. So variety selection is really important, and that could be another factor to help you try and prioritize maybe where to spray if needed. We run a lot of fungicide trials. I don't have time to go through all of the data here. Something else we run a lot of is Cobra, and that works quite well, the herbicide Cobra, and very often it's up there with our best performing fungicides. So here's some data just as an example of what we typically see. There are some fungicides like Miravis Neo that we would not recommend for white mold too. Most situations, if we're talking tar spot, for the most part, a lot of fungicides do a pretty good job on that. But white mold, you've got to be a little bit more careful about that. So I'll show you a source of information to go and check how those fungicides are rated for management. And then timing is really important. We really have to control or protect the flowers. So from beginning of flowering, when we have one flower on 50% of the plants, through to the R3 growth stage where we still have flowers, but we're at the beginning of pod development, is that window we really need to target. Once we go beyond that, we really start losing efficacy very, very quickly. So at the Crop Protection Network, if you Google that and search for white mold or fungicide efficacy soybean, we have these fungicide efficacy charts. And so we've got all the different diseases listed there. And there's a category for white mold, and then we have these different products and where we see them fitting, whether they be good or very good or poor for white mold control. So here's a quick list of the typical products that we would generally recommend that are ranked as good or very good for white mold suppression. So in terms of white mold risk factors, we did some work at a postdoc in my lab, Mamadou, and he looked at the MSU performance trial data that John Boyce and Deachin had run for many years. So we looked at 15 years worth of data, and the interesting thing that popped out is the average temperature there of less than 67 Fahrenheit during the month of July was something that really sort of tended to trigger heavy disease years. And then precipitation, somewhere between 3/4 of an inch to less than 4.5 inches. There was a year or two where we had heavy rainfall and we didn't see much disease. I question this a little bit. It'd be great to have even more years of data in this data set, but it was interesting to note that under very, very heavy wet soils, we didn't see disease in those 1 or 2 years. We didn't see a really strong drive between maturity groups, but there were some subtle differences. So the longer maturity groups tended to have just a little bit more disease, but we couldn't pull it out statistically. And that's sometimes borne out in various observations that people see. So I'm not going to talk about the model behind Sporecaster right now. We can come back to it in a minute. But again, Sporecaster, the model that was developed, uses moving 30-day average temperature and wind speed and other factors to predict the risk of these white mold apothecia. So it uses weather data that's pulled from a whole bunch of different stations and smoothed out and interpolated between weather stations to basically run that algorithm on your phone through the Sporecaster app and give you a sense of risk. And I pulled the model yesterday, and yes, we certainly are at risk in some areas, not all. And again, this is predicting the risk of those apothecia being present. So I encourage you to have a look at this, play with it, and then use all those other risk factors to think about, am I at risk? Should I be making a fungicide application? I don't think I'm even going to talk through these summary points, but I would say, year in and year out, variety resistance is really important. Field history, also equally important, and then the weather after that, and canopy closure and all those other pieces that can come together. Okay, let's jump in and talk a little bit about optimizing management of tar spot then. So the first thing you need to be able to do is to be able to identify this disease. We've already had false alarms due to insect frass or bug poop out there on plants. It looks very, very similar. So when you send me a good quality picture of tar spot, what I'm looking for is a slight browning around the tar spot structure, or the tar spot. And the tar spot will look raised as well. It won't be flat to the leaf surface. It will be slightly raised, which I know can be kind of hard to tell because these are very small. The other thing, the lesions are pulled slightly along the leaf veins. So there'll be some direction with the leaf veins. So that's something else I'm really looking at. And then the other thing I encourage people to do is to flip that leaf over, because that tar spot lesion will always be protruding through the bottom side. There's some other lookalikes like early grey leaf spot, but typically that'll be flat. And then the inside of that lesion will be a white light brown color. So there's a number of things we're looking at to differentiate. Bug poop will either scrape off, or you've got to put some water or spit on it and see if that lesion will rub off to distinguish insect frass from tar spot. Okay, so having said that, I would imagine that if we come out to your county, we can probably find tar spot now. We were up in Sanilac just the other day, and we were able to find it in a couple of fields at very, very low incidence. So it's only a few plants so far for the most part. And by all means, put in the comments if you're seeing higher levels of tar spot. I'd like to know about that. But what I would also emphasize is that although if I spent the time to drive around the entire state and light the map up, that doesn't mean that you should spray now. It means you should get out and look in your field. It means you need to get out and scout. Pulling the trigger right now might be too early, especially if we can only afford to make a single fungicide application. We do want to make sure we make that at the optimal time. So just quickly, the big difference between the models and disease between white mold and tar spot is that white mold infects through the flowers. That's it. It's a one shot. It's not going to amplify in the field. It's just through the flowers. Tar spot will amplify through the season. And this actually makes the fungicide timing a lot more challenging in many ways, and some of the modeling more challenging too. So it's going to build over time. So if you spray today, that does not mean you're going to suppress development in 3 weeks from now. It's going to continue to increase. So we want to try and optimize that fungicide timing. We know that weather is a key driver here, and this is a photo to really demonstrate that moisture is a key component of that. I'm going to just jump you into the modeling really quickly. I'm getting a lot of questions about how this works, and it might be making you scratch your head a little bit. But basically, we've used a number of years of data to build this, and my colleagues at Wisconsin have been doing the bulk of this. We just provide the data to them. And so from 2018 to 22, we've incorporated a whole bunch of data from multiple states. We've used that historical weather data across those regions. And then we go through and do a lot of correlation analysis to look at what variables are driving disease development, and then try and fit some models to that. So we look at a whole bunch of different things, be it temperature, relative humidity, minimum temperature, maximum temperature, average temperature, moving 14-day, 21-day, or 30-day windows, so weather up until today, and how that's driving risk. And then these are basically the two models that we came up with from that. And these are now run together as an ensemble. So we have some coefficients here, and what we're looking at for one of the models is the 30-day moving average mean temperature, and then the 30-day moving average daily maximum relative humidity. The other model also uses the 30-day moving average mean temperature, but then it incorporates the 14-day daily total nighttime hours with relative humidity above 90%. And relative humidity above 90% is a good proxy for leaf wetness. So that leaf wetness is incorporated into the model. Something really interesting that we noted was that there was some dip in the model when there was extended leaf wetness or humidity parameters. So it seemed that too much water can be a bad thing for disease development, at least when we look at it in terms of the model development, which is kind of curious. So I ran the model yesterday just for some of the locations that I had, and we were at high risk. We were over threshold in the red for our color scheme, and we've just dropped below that now, and that's probably a factor of that temperature would be my guess. We do see that temperature is one of the crucial parameters, and extended periods of mild temperatures seem to be more critical for disease development. So 64 to 73 degrees Fahrenheit for disease development. Of course, when it gets hot, when it gets up above 80, it doesn't mean it's going to kill the disease, but it may just slow down development. So cooler temperatures seem to be more important. So what does this mean? Well, the model is just telling you what the risk is. For the last 30 days, are we at risk for development today? So it's not, it can only forecast, so far forward according to the weather that's coming in. So what's really important, especially with this tar spot model, is getting out into your fields and knowing if you have tar spot. So even if we're red and we're at higher risk, it doesn't mean anything unless you know you've got tar spot out in your field. So get out and check. And this is what we've typically seen down in our trial location down in Decatur, Michigan. When we detect disease in early or mid-July, that's when we tend to get greater yield loss. And we can see, maybe somewhere between a 30 to 50 bushel impact on a susceptible hybrid, and we can, protect that with a fungicide application. We tend to see very minimal impact if disease doesn't develop until August, the start of August or mid-August. And so the last couple of years, our yield differences between where we've sprayed and not sprayed have been fairly minimal, 5 bushels, maybe, just sort of depending on the hybrid and the product. So early onset is really important. I don't think at this point in time we're quite set up as badly as we were in 21. But it's out there and it's got the potential to cause yield loss. Let's chat really quickly about fungicide timing then. This is really important, and I think I would urge people not to just go out and pull the trigger because, your county is lit up yellow on the map and there's some tar spot. Get out and have a look. I think you really want to try and optimize that timing. So I've split this plot out by just the bushel final yield. I've got a couple of untreated checks down here, just showing you the variability in the data. So one of those untreated checks was 205 bushel. The other was 217 bushel. The V9 application of Veltima was just too early, and it was no different really, or fell right next to those untreated checks. We did see greater disease suppression with 2 fungicide applications. So the V13 followed by R3, yes, certainly was greater disease suppression, but it was really no different, maybe a bushel better than a single application at R2. And that was on the 5th of August for us. So I still feel, for the most part, we have a little bit of time to wait and not be panicking and just, spraying product early, especially if we're only going to make and can only afford a single fungicide application. And then if we are going to make a fungicide application, you should leave a check strip. If you don't leave a check strip, you have no idea, what that fungicide did for you. It doesn't need to be the whole length of the field. It's just going to be long enough that you can run the combine with the yield monitor to get a sense of how that worked out for you. I can't stress that enough. We've been in situations before where people feel like the fungicide has failed, and I don't know, maybe the variety wasn't very good, but we don't know because you didn't leave a check strip. So I just cannot stress that enough. Really important to do. So management of task spot, hybrid resistance or tolerance, really important. And if you're trying to prioritize fields, think about, how those hybrids stack up. Do you know that some are more susceptible than others? I would definitely focus on them for scouting and fungicide applications as warranted. The weather, you can continue to monitor risk through this task spotter app and then get out and scout, use those check strips. Crop rotation and residue management seem to play a very small piece in disease management here. So we've seen plenty of task spot in fields that never had task spot in them before, and that's partly because the inoculum is all over the state. Fields, a few miles away may end up depositing spores in your new cornfield. So be mindful of that. I'll just finish here with ear mold and vomitoxin or DON in our risk. So this is the same pathogen that causes head scab on wheat. So we've done a lot more disease modeling with wheat and have demonstrated how a fungicide can be really effective, at least at reducing that disease level by about 50% in wheat. The heads are exposed, we spray the fungicide, and then we harvest about a month later. So it's very different to the corn situation. I just pulled up the Fusarium risk tool. Again, this is developed for wheat. It needs some validation in corn, but it is, as of yesterday, showing high risk for where the model is still running in the state. What's happening here in the grey is the model is shutting off. The way they've set it up is that once spring wheat is clearly off, the model is just shutting down. I've asked them to continue running this model, but it's showing high risk. I think we are in a very different situation though compared to last year. Last year we had so much stress going into silking. We had very uneven stands within a field, crop stages within a field. So we extended that silking window within fields. And by extending the silking and having poor pollination, we're certainly opening ourselves up for additional risk for gibberella ear rot infection. So I think the risk is there, but I think its overall situation is far better than last year. So just as my final slide, so we want to think about ear mold management and any disease management, really. Use multiple hybrids or multiple varieties. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. And ask your seed dealer about variety resistance. There's not as much screening done for ear mold as there should be, and it's a challenging thing to screen for. There's a couple of fungicides, Proline and Miravis Neo, that have some labels for suppression, but I emphasize that it's suppression really. We've been running some trials trying to get a better handle on how much we can expect reductions, but it's nowhere near as clean as in wheat. It's just much easier to manage in wheat. We certainly want to think about Western bend cutworm, and Chris can fill us in on that. That secondary damage can certainly introduce molds and then subsequent toxins into the ears. And I will leave it at that. And please put your questions in. We'll get on those. Over to you, Jeff.
Both the podcast, just the oral version only, and then the recordings on our Field Crop Team's website. So feel free to follow us on any of those. Jeff, you can go to the next slide, and we will move into our Q&A time. Got a number of questions specifically focused on the disease issues that Marty's been talking about. And Marty's been very active and has been answering all of those, but we'll also do them orally, just in case you're on the phone or don't have your chat box open. We'll start off with a question from Gordon. If we want to spray a fungicide at R1, and this is specifically referring to white mold and soybean, it's been a dry week for a week or more, and the forecast is continued dryness for another week or more. Does evidence show that we should wait until just prior to a forecast for rain to apply the fungicide?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So for white mold, the critical period is really between that R1 and R3 growth stage. So yeah, if you're planning on making an application and feel like the risk levels up until now have been relatively low, I would wait until R2, maybe R3 growth stage and get it on, but I wouldn't wait until the R4 growth stage if you're trying to control white mold, because then you're just not going to get anywhere near the level of control that you would like. And we've got plenty of data to show you that that's the case.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another question along those lines. Where does Revitech fit in white mold control?
Yeah, it's ranked as poor, unfortunately. So not all fungicides are equal for white mold. So again, I'd have a quick look through that fungicide efficacy chart to try and pick products that do a better job for you.
Mark Seaman with Michigan Soybean has a question about the Sporecaster app. He's done some checking for some fields around the Saginaw area. Got plenty of soil moisture for many days. The risk index is still relatively low at 22. That seems low for soybeans that have canopied and are flowering. And just wondering, do you think that high temperatures are keeping those risks low?
Definitely. I think that's the part that's probably driving that risk prediction low. Doesn't mean you're going to escape disease, but yes, I believe that's why we're seeing that. If everyone remembers back to 2014, we had very cool conditions, unusually cool conditions during July, and moisture above normal precipitation and moisture events. And so that's why we had a really bad white mold epidemic that year, those factors sort of coming together. So yeah, we're definitely not in that situation, but there's still a risk out there. So I would, run that model and think about your field risk for previous years to try and factor in those fungicide decisions.
Marty, for the Sporecaster app, if you're on 30-inch rows, the app actually asks you, have you canopied? If you're on 15s, I guess it kind of assumes that. Can you talk a little bit about the impact of canopy closure on those risk values?
Yeah, absolutely. And this comes also, I didn't have a point in there for plant population, but that's another factor that contributes to canopy closure, at least within the row. So yeah, we see a pretty big difference between 15s or drilled, 7.5-inch beans, as opposed to 30-inch. So those white mold mushrooms, they actually require filtered light for development. So if we put a box out there and create 100% shade, they're not going to form. 100% sunlight, they're not going to form. They need 40 to 60% shade factor. And they're going to respond to certain wavelengths actually that get filtered through for the correct formation. There's certain things that help to trigger the way that they develop. So anyway, yes, in 15-inch rows, we've seen much higher and slightly earlier apothecia or mushroom production as opposed to 30-inch rows. And plant population can come into play here as well. If you're planting 160,000 seeds per acre, you might want to play with some lower populations. I know Mike Staten did some work showing that 80,000 seeds per acre reduced disease. I think that's maybe a little low. I'd be a little scared to maybe make that recommendation, but I would certainly think about your planting population as another part of the management package.
And for those of you who are irrigating, there's a checkbox for irrigation. Of course, that's going to potentially exacerbate or increase the risk.
Yeah, we're not as happy with the irrigated model. I still feel we need some more tweaking, and I've got a graduate student that's been working on that with Yunsuk Dong as well, our irrigation specialist. With irrigation, we certainly want to try and limit irrigation as much as possible up until that R3 growth stage, and then put more water to the crop once we sort of come out of that high risk window. So that's something to think about if you have irrigation.
So still talking about the Sporecaster app, do you know, is that app applicable to other crops?
Yeah, we're playing around with it in dry beans and potato. Jamie Wilbur is looking at it in potato as well. So essentially it's so the one thing that could be different between crops is that canopy development, and that was sort of part of the factor there in that model development. So when they're out scouting, for those apothecial, the mushroom counts, it was in a soybean canopy. So that could be the one thing that'd be different that we'd need to take into account. And to make that app better, I really do believe that canopy closure or measures of canopy are going to be an important parameter that we might be able to get out with satellites or aircraft or whatnot in the future.
Okay, well, let's switch gears and we'll talk about tar spot here for a bit. Mitch asks, I've heard about the tar spot pathogen might actually be a complex of a few different species. Is that something to be concerned about?
Not for the grower yet, but yes. It looks like there may certainly be like 2 or 3 maybe closely related species that are causing tar spot. That's some work that we are following up on and trying to understand that pathogen a little bit better. And I think one of the things that could be, I would guess that even if we truly do have 2 or 3 species that are out there infecting corn, the fungicides will probably have pretty similar activity across those very closely related species. There's potential for difference, absolutely, but I would suspect they're going to be similar. I'm more concerned, though, about fungicide resistance. We really only have 3 modes of action that we use, and there's plenty of evidence for fungicide resistance in other pathogens. So frog eye leaf spot on soybean or Cercospora leaf spot on sugar beets. We have resistance to one of those modes of action there. So that's a really great concern. And so there may be differences between those species with respect to fungicide resistance. And that's something we're trying to look at the moment too.
So John asks a really good detailed scouting question about tar spot. Does tar spot start out with those brown spots that you showed, or does it start off with yellow that then turn brown?
I would say for all intents and purposes, they start out as brown spots. Maybe microscopically, there may be some yellowing as that pathogen's infecting, but you're not going to be able to see that very easily with the naked eye. So for all intents and purposes, when you're out there scouting, look for those brown spots. If it's yellow, I guess you could send it into the diagnostic lab and we could take a look under the microscope. And we have a molecular tool for diagnostics as well to help when the samples are hard to determine. But I don't use that in my scouting. I just look for those brown spots as we were showing in some of those photos.
Julius is wondering if there's a database of resistant cultivars for white molds in soy and tar spot in corn.
There's not, and part of the issue there is the varieties turn over pretty quickly. I would love to take what we typically grow in Michigan and screen them. And we do often do that for companies here in Michigan in private trials. I return that data back to those people, those companies, and then they push it back out to their customers. I think that's a really important thing to have that screening data. And I mean, the white mold data has been fantastic. Been really neat, really clean. We get pretty consistent disease up at Montcalm. So that's been a really, really helpful thing that we've done. Tar spot's been a little bit more challenging, just with the happenstance of we get disease, we don't get disease, just a little bit harder. But I think we are light years ahead of some other states that haven't quite experienced tar spot yet. I think we've done a pretty good job at screening out those really susceptible hybrids through either private company work or the work that we've done in collaboration. But yeah, there's not one spot you can go to for that information. You've got to hassle your seed dealer. They should be able to get you an answer. If they can't, they should hassle their company to work on that.
All right. Pamela asks if there is a particular method that you recommend for scouting for tar spot in the canopy, different areas in the field.
Yeah, you definitely want to, corn is really hard to scout. It's just challenging to cover, large areas. We typically look along sometimes the eastern edge. I feel like the eastern side will, not get that initial. Let me make sure I got this right. Sorry, the western edge, right? Yeah, the western edge. I'm sorry. So we're looking for areas that are going to hold any moisture. The sun moves a different way than up here as it does in Australia. That always throws me off. That's always, I feel like an idiot answering these questions or looking for direction. So yeah, the western edge where we might be seeing any spores that are blown into that canopy from outside, but also a longer dew period. It doesn't get burnt off as quickly. Excuse me. So there are a couple of things we look at, and then certainly go inside that crop, and then looking for any gaps or spaces within that crop as well can be a spot to look for that. You know, they tend to be hotter areas. But yeah, you want to try and cover as much as that field as possible, at least, you know, from the edges. Yeah.
So Marty, at this time of the summer, are you expecting the disease to be still coming from the soil or more wind blown? Like where should we be focusing our scouting at this time?
Yeah, I mean, I would still scout at this point. I would look throughout the canopy, but for the most part, what we've seen so far has been those leaves below the ear leaf. So it's either, you know, come up somewhat recently from the soil, although I think a lot of that's already happened with those earlier moisture events that we have had, and it's just reproducing, but it will over time start to climb up through the canopy. So lower canopy tends to be more fruitful in terms of scouting. And we are starting to test samples for strobilurin sensitivity. So if you want to submit samples, feel free to do that. Got a project in the lab looking at fungicide sensitivity.
All right, we'll give Marty a chance to get a drink of water here. I've got a question for Jeff. Wildfire smoke, is there any in our forecast?
And not in the immediate future, but there still are fires burning in Canada as we speak, and they have been for some time. And given our change right now, our upper air change or jet stream change, there is a possibility we could see some south and eastward movement. But right now, there isn't. I have not seen any indication of a new outbreak or something new in that regard, fortunately. And that probably will be the case for much of the upcoming week as well.
Okay. All right, we've got a couple more disease type questions. And again, everyone feel free to put in questions, not only for both of our presenters today, but any of our other specialists. We're going to switch over to them in a minute. Back to diseases. If there's a corn in your area that's between tassel and R2, that blister or brown silk stage, tar spot low density, should we wait on the fungicide application or should we go ahead and apply?
Yeah, I think it means, or I think part of the question there is what do we mean by density? But I think we do. I think we can wait. I think there's time to wait and get that application on at a better timing. As long as you get across all the acres that you want to get across. Personally, I would wait a little bit longer. And just really pay attention because things can move fairly quickly with tar spot. We don't want to be in the situation that we're driving by in the pickup and now we can see tar spot, and then we're too late. So really paying close attention to fields, walking them frequently to keep an eye on where things are at. I would wait a little bit later if possible. We've still got a lot of season to go. With the single fungicide application, that fungicide is going to run out of steam. So something to keep in mind.
Okay. This is a question from Ryan about a specific fungicide. What are your thoughts on early fungicide applications with tetraconazole? Maybe about the V5 stage to help combat tar spot, maybe, in future years. Yeah,
it's a good question, but I don't think that's going to do anything, unfortunately. So, we can put fungicides on even some of, maybe the better ranked products and or rated products, and they're effective, when they're put on for a couple of weeks, but then tar spot starts to increase again. So what we've seen so far is those early vegetative applications basically have no benefit for tar spot management, unfortunately.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for all those questions. Really giving Marty a run for his money this morning. I just want to open it up to any of our other specialists who are on this morning. If you have anything that has been interesting, lots of calls coming in on a particular topic. I think Chris Defonso was on earlier. I wanted to say something to us about some bugs.
Yes, I'm taking a lot of notes as Marty and Jeff were talking, and now I have too much stuff to talk about. So Western bean is flying. I don't think we've peaked yet. I'm looking at the trapping trapping network. And some of the traps, I think, aren't being trapped weekly or checked weekly. And that's really important because it's that peak that helps time scouting. So I don't think we're going to have a nice peak, like a mountain peak. I think we're going to have a hill. And if we do, that'll kind of like extend that female egg laying out for a while, which could be good or bad. That's kind of frustrating. So when you're scouting, Marty talked about looking low in the canopy for tar spot. What Western bean is up, at least for me, because I'm kind of short, but you're looking into that near where that tassel is, so ear level and above. And so it's, you know, it's a little frustrating because now there's two things to be walking the canopy for, or walking through corn, and you're looking essentially on the whole plant. I always use a face shield now. It's really important to be able to see stuff and not have corn in your eye. And, you know, you really got to, and so kind of gearing up to get in there and be doing a really good job is really important. And our threshold is fairly low. It's only 5% cumulative plants with egg masses. That means if you scouted 2 weeks in a row, you're accumulating your percentage. So it's fairly low. It's very challenging. I think Marty said that as well. It's very challenging in corn. People are asking me about products. They're trying to parse out which product to use. Sure, there's generics and kind of trade named products that could have differences in a sticker or some kind of UV protection thing. But in the end, the real key is timing and coverage. So parsing out whether you used a warrior type thing or a bifenthrin, you don't have to do that. I mean, if you have a decent product, it's the timing and the coverage that you need to be really careful about. And that timing for Western bean, if it lines up with your fungicide, that's fine. But it sounds like the tar spot applications could be going even later, and that would be past your Western bean timing. So Western bean cutworm is probably, you know, you're looking at through silking, perhaps, maybe a little bit beyond that. But those little guys are going to be down in that ear at some point, and and they're not going to be able to be killed by a product. So timing and coverage, and then if you're growing VIP corn, not many of us do that. If you have VIP corn out there, which is the Agrasure Viptera type of thing, you know, that's something I wouldn't scout that. I mean, later maybe do some checking of it, but you have other fields to scout before that. Again, Western bean is rarely a yield limiting thing. It feeds on that little moist tip, but it opens that ear up to Marty's pathogens and enhances the infection. You can still have his ear molds without Western bean or corn borer or whatever, but they kind of enhance that. So we're not looking at dramatic yield losses, just some quality issues. And then his talk about a check strip is very important. In that same check strip, you could also see if we've made a good decision. I don't have good answers for you. This is a frustrating pest. And just, again, we don't want resistant insects out there. It would just make management more and more difficult. So be careful out there. That's a reference from Hill Street Blues. You have to be old like me to know that reference, but I think that's all I got. It looks like Dennis might have a follow-up.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. So Dennis Pennington, our wheat specialist, has got a couple things. So Dennis, thanks for joining.
Yeah, good morning. Just wanted to give a quick update on wheat harvest. I would say we're probably in that 65 to 70% harvested in the state overall. The frequent rainfall that we've had in the past is causing some quality problems. Fusarium head blight has not been a problem. We've not had vomitoxin at high levels at all. In fact, it's almost non-existent, but we are seeing falling numbers decrease. So if you're in an area where you still have some wheat out there, I would be getting your wheat harvested just as soon as this opportunity even if you're a little bit higher grain moisture. I've heard elevators in the thumb are taking grain at 22% moisture and drying it. You got to pay the shrink on it, but you don't have to pay the drying charge. So in that map that showed the total rainfall that Jeff put up earlier, probably those areas that are in that yellow area are the ones where the wheat is the most significantly impacted by that in terms of falling number issues. There are some areas kind of along the tip of the thumb where, it matured a little bit later, and the falling number is still very good there. So, but it is low falling number in some places, so keep an eye on that. Regarding the variety trial report, we do have all of our sites harvested now. We are working on collating the data and getting the report out. We pulled samples at harvest, and we're running falling number on those. Those should be done by the end of next week. And the plan is to get the report out the following week, probably that last week in July. So that's kind of just a quick update on wheat, unless anybody has any questions for me.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dennis. There's no questions in the chat right now. Any other specialists have anything they would like to share? I'm going to ask one last question for Marty, but any specialists that are on, if you've got something, feel free to just unmute. Marty, is there a distribution map on fungicides with resistance to tar spot or white mold?
No, because there's no documented resistance yet. No one's looked for resistance in tar spot to date. We're not aware of any fungicide failures though, where fungicides have been sprayed, and we're not, getting the control that we would think of. We have done with other partners, other states, looked at white mold fungicide resistance. There's no cause for alarm at this point, but it's something that we're certainly watching.
Okay, great. Thanks, Marty. So that brings us to the end. I've got no more questions in the chat. We have had a really active morning. So once again, thank you to Marty and Jeff for great presentations and for other input from specialists. And thanks to all of you who have put in questions. That's really why we're here. We're wanting to take your questions. So that's what next week is all about. So feel free to join us next week. Bring any and all questions you've got on different cropping systems, and we'll handle those next week during our open Q&A. So everyone, thank you for joining us, and have a great week. We'll see you next week.